Arizona declaring a state of emergency over illegal border crossings into the U.S. The governor bringing in the National Guard, saying the Border Patrol and local officials.
The Arizona sun was scorching, the sky was clear, and the border checks were buzzing with activity, until everything came to a standstill. Without notice, a section of the U.S.-Mexico border near Nogales was sealed off. National Guard convoys arrived. Patrol drones were suspended. Civilians were pushed backward. It was neither a drill, nor was it political. It was something far more disturbing. Something was brewing behind the scenes for weeks. Ground sensors have been alerting even when there was no observable movement. Surveillance cameras detected unusual heat signatures beneath the earth. Whispers among agents suggested something deeper, literally. And then the truth came out. What investigators found under the Arizona desert was not a tunnel. It was an underground masterpiece, a vast, militaristic corridor with reinforced walls, pressure-sensitive flooring, lights, ventilation, and even train lines. This was not a smuggler's shortcut. It was a violation of national security on a magnitude never previously witnessed. Authorities moved quickly. Checkpoints were shut down. The airspace was cleared. Media blackouts ensued. Behind the barrier, an elite task team fell into America's most deadly blind spot. What they discovered altered everything. Because this wasn't only about Arizona. It wasn't just about the border. This was about the future of warfare and infiltration, one that went beyond cameras, barriers, and boots on the ground. Welcome to the tale about the tunnel that rocked the country. A dark, sophisticated, and unexpected discovery prompted the United States to battle a new type of enemy, one that moved not by air or water, but through the Earth's very bones. For decades, America's southern border has been fortified with tall steel barriers, motion sensors, infrared cameras, and overhead drones. Billions of dollars have been invested, and countless man-hours have been deployed, all in order to prevent what has been observed. But what was discovered under the Arizona desert made every surface-level barrier seem redundant, because this wasn't simply a tunnel, it was a monster. The structure, which spanned around 6 miles, was everything from basic. Gone are the days of hurriedly excavated tunnels and dirty crawl spaces. This tunnel bore the hallmarks of military-grade engineering. Composite walls reinforced with vibration-dampening panels and air circulation systems that mimicked natural airflow to escape discovery. Lighting strips spanned the length of the core. Rail lines were placed on shock-absorbing ties, designed not only to smuggle foot traffic, but also to convey cargo, fast, heavily, and often. Pressure-sensitive flooring reduced thermal traces from footfalls, providing a direct counter to heat-detecting surveillance drones hovering overhead. Even the path it chose was purposeful. Instead of skirting remote areas, the tunnel snaked beneath densely populated places such as industrial parks, bustling highways, and even tourist rest stations. These were not ignored by mistake. They were chosen because high-traffic regions elicit less suspicion from border police, which concentrates resources on desolate, open territory. The access and exit points were equally as complex. One opened beneath a long abandoned barn, with the floor constructed to roll open using hydraulic hinges. Another was buried behind a rock outcrop, releasing warm air disguised as natural desert heat coming from the stone. This structure's design was meticulously planned. Every inch had a purpose. Every bend in the tunnel was calculated. And this is what made it so horrifying. This was not a smuggler's shortcut or a frantic attempt to flee. This was infrastructure. This was an investment. This was an underground artery built for long-term silent use, functioning directly beneath the feet of one of the world's most intensively monitored borders. It was a direct threat to the fundamental premise of border security, because while the United States was monitoring the sky and fortifying its borders, something darker, deeper, and smarter was creeping forward, unseen and unstoppable. When the first agents descended into the tunnel, they anticipated to uncover contraband, perhaps narcotics, or evidence of human trafficking. However, what they discovered surprised everyone: a subterranean network designed specifically for infiltration. The air inside was not stale. It was filtered, cool, and circulating, fresh enough to withstand prolonged human presence. Instead of crumbling mud, the walls were elegant panels covered in anti-resonance polymers to absorb sonar sounds. What lay ahead of them was a tunnel of deliberate silence, designed to survive, avoid, and most ominously, function without leaving a trace. Along the tunnel's edges were chambers enclosed in vacuum-sealed boxes. Inside, biometric spoofing kits are intended to replicate fingerprint and retina patterns, vocal modulators, forged identification cards including microchips programmed in several languages. It was as if someone had constructed a passport factory and hidden it underneath. Encrypted tablets, satellite uplinks, and shortwave communication equipment queued up at improvised control posts deep inside the tunnel. Analysts eventually discovered that these hubs not only received communications, but also sent them in time bursts to evade radio detection. Whoever built this has extensive expertise in surveillance countermeasures. In one portion, investigators uncovered what seemed to be a processing center: foldable metal workstations, biometric scanning pads, and chairs fastened to the floor. This was more than just a paragraph. It was for screening, organizing, and possibly even allocating identities. Even more alarming, trace evidence indicated frequent usage: tread imprints from wheeled carriages, metallic canisters left scrapes on the tunnel sides, discarded meal wrappers and water packs suggested at a prolonged stay. This was not a one-off operation. This was a rotating door that worked like clockwork. The most distressing discovery occurred in a short branch of the tunnel, a temperature-controlled room filled with stored food, first aid supplies, and beds, a safe place for valuable items. Some speculated that it might have acted as a holding cell. Others suspected it was a hideout for spies already in the United States. The conclusion struck hard. This was not a smuggler's pipeline. It was a ghost passage, a delivery mechanism for men, tools, and plans, which the United States had not anticipated. The question was no longer what was going through the tunnel, but who had already gotten out. The desert sun continued to shine above ground, but the entire region was in a state of emergency. Within hours of the tunnel's discovery, federal orders were issued to close the affected section of the Arizona border. What followed was like something out of a battle zone. Checkpoints that were regularly busy with vehicles were eerie and quiet. Military vehicles surged in, blocking access roads. Helicopters hovered. Drones were grounded. Even commercial flights were redirected to avoid the area. The public was taken off guard and looked for explanations. However, officials maintained their silence. What little information spilled came from frightened murmurs and unverified stories. Local news anchors speculated on cartel conflict and foreign sabotage. But no one suspected the truth. A tunnel had been working beneath them, potentially for years, concealed in plain sight. Daily life in Nogales, Tucson, and the neighboring communities was turned upside down. Cross-border trade came to a complete halt. Thousands of truckloads of food and merchandise became trapped at the border, unable to go. Local businesses, restaurants, supermarkets, and construction yards began losing money by the hour. Traffic poured onto surrounding roadways as interstate trade was redirected hundreds of miles away, causing jams that reached across state boundaries. Hospitals faced delays in medical supplies delivery. Schools along the boundary used lockdown precautions. Border Patrol officials, supported by National Guard personnel, began conducting vehicle searches outside of the customary inspection zones. Tensions in the neighborhood rose. For years, many people have grumbled about the militarization of the border. They were now living in the midst of it. Soldiers carrying weapons guarded suburban streets. Watchtowers sprung up near residential areas. Floodlights, generators, and the steady sound of monitoring drones returning to the air greeted us as night fell. Journalists swarmed on the location, but were stopped by hastily placed barriers. Reporters were detained behind tape lines, relying on shaky mobile phone footage and secondhand statements from gas station clerks and hotel owners. The tale was developing, but the details remained concealed, much like the danger that prompted it. The border closure was more than just a security measure. It was a warning to the nation. Something big, scary, and unseen had penetrated America's defenses. While the tunnel may have been beneath, the fallout was now crashing to the surface. The further the detectives dug, both physically and metaphorically, the odd the image grew. Normally, a finding of this magnitude would result in fingerprints, a cartel name, a rival smuggling network, a foreign agency. However, this time, there was nothing. There are no logos spray-painted on the walls, no gang emblems. There is no boasting on the dark web. There are no intercepted phone calls. Just quiet. The pieces utilized in tunnel construction were not purchased from local hardware stores or pieced together using junk. Forensic experts tracked metal alloys found in the train system to Eastern European firms. Microchips in the communication devices corresponded to batches supplied to shell businesses in Southeast Asia. Adhesives for sealing electrical panels were widely utilized in South American industrial complexes. However, they were marketed by offshore distributors. In short, everything was designed to be untraceable. Everything was intended to confuse, deceive, or erase. This was not the work of desperate criminals or inexperienced smugglers. This was the template for a complex operation, most likely coordinated by a network with global reach and military accuracy. A scheme that required no flag, face, or name to instill dread in the heart of the world's most powerful country. This is what made it so horrifying. Analysts considered the notion that the tunnel belonged to everyone, rather than just one person. A concerted effort by rogue states, black market engineers, cybercrime syndicates, and maybe even insiders with knowledge of U.S. border vulnerabilities. It was not a tunnel, but a test, a prototype, a proof of concept for what might be developed in different areas, boundaries, and continents. If it succeeds here, it can succeed anywhere. Intelligence agencies tried to find a motive. Was it trafficking, espionage, a future attack? Nobody could say for sure, but every alternative led to the same conclusion. Whoever created this had the time, money, and vision to circumvent one of the world's most heavily monitored and defended borders. It wasn't only what the tube transported. It marked a change in warfare, subversion, and the ability of nations, known or unknown, to invade without being noticed. And the worst part? It had already happened. Following the discovery, America was forced to confront some difficult realities. For decades, border security has been a highly visible operation, with miles-long fences, drones flying overhead, and officials patrolling with dogs and firearms. However, none of this had prevented what was now being dubbed the most sophisticated subterranean infiltration in U.S. history. Guarding the sky and keeping an eye on the highways was no longer adequate. The combat had moved underground, into the earth, the rock, and the empty areas that few had considered required protecting. Within a few days, high-level discussions were conducted in Washington. Homeland Security issued emergency guidelines to assess subsurface vulnerabilities in all southern states. Agencies that had previously specialized in counterterrorism or cyber defense were now briefing on geology and fault lines. Engineers and tunnel warfare specialists, many of whom had not been contacted since the war in Afghanistan, were brought into the discussion. These sessions gave rise to a new acronym, SSI, or Subsurface Security Initiative. It suggested a complete overhaul of the national border defense policy. Seismic sensors, which had previously been deemed optional or outmoded, were to be installed in large numbers throughout high-risk areas. Ground-penetrating radar arrays would now survey remote and unmonitored areas. AI systems capable of identifying unusual soil movements were prioritized for development. For the first time in history, the United States began developing a subterranean defensive system. Even private contractors and utility firms were brought in. Federal agencies received maps of pipelines, subway routes, storm drains, and anything else that spanned beneath the Earth's surface to cross-reference with suspected tunnel activities. Geologists collaborated with defense specialists to create 3D landscape models, trying to find out where the soil had been tampered with and where hollows could still be hidden. Meanwhile, the Department of Defense launched a test program to deploy robotic tunnel drones, which were formerly utilized in Middle Eastern cave systems, but have now been repurposed for domestic spying. They slithered into nooks and recesses, looking for evidence of tampering, hidden technologies, or expansion sites. But beyond the gear, something fundamental needed to be fixed: the attitude. For years, border security has been reactive. This experience demonstrated the necessity to become anticipatory, because no one was watching underground, and there is precisely where the enemy attacked. The dirt had become the new front line, and this time, America wasn't standing on it. It was standing over it, completely unconscious of what was happening, quietly, purposefully, and ruthlessly, just beneath its feet. In the scorching glare of the Arizona desert, America discovered more than simply a tunnel. It discovered a peril it had never fully anticipated. Under the border fortifications, beneath the kilometers of razor wire and watchtowers, an invisible invasion had occurred. Silent, patient, devastating. This was not a fluke. It was hardly an isolated act of desperation. It was a well-planned operation that revealed not just a hole in the earth, but also a flaw in the country's security strategy. For all the billions spent on fences, drones, and people on the ground, one tunnel demonstrated how easy everything could be avoided. The border remains blocked, and the area surrounding Nogales is roped off like a battlefield, but the real fight has only barely begun. A battle waged not with firearms or tanks, but with scanners, seismic pulses, and AI-powered mapping systems. It's a battle for the hidden, buried, and forgotten levels of national security. As agencies labor around the clock to map every inch of the terrain, engineers develop plans for underground detection grids, and intelligence analysts look for the face behind the faceless operation. One thing stays constant: this incident has altered everything. Because if a tunnel this advanced could exist undetected, how many more are there already? How many ghost passageways have been created under the surface, waiting, watching, and prepared? America has long been identified by its above-ground power, including its cities, infrastructure, and military force. However, this terrible revelation highlighted a blind spot, and now the soil itself is suspicious. In the next months and years, the nation will be compelled to think differently, dig deeper, literally and tactically, because the next attack might not come from the skies or over a border. It may come from below, where no one bothered to look. The Arizona tunnel was not only a breach, it was a message. And suddenly, the entire globe is listening.